When I was 10, my parents and I went to visit my grandmother for spring break. My cousin also came to visit, and we decided we wanted to go to the YMCA for the day. My grandmother dropped us off and said she would come and pick us up in 4 hours. On that day, the YMCA was empty. There were a couple of adults in the exercise room, but that's it. We went to the basketball court, and after 2 hours of playing tag and shooting baskets, we were bored. I've never been the biggest fan of swimming, but this YMCA had a pretty cool pool, so we changed into our bathing suits and headed in there. The pool was empty except for the lifeguard. We played a bunch of games and swam laps, but after about an hour there wasn't much left to do, and there was no one except us to hang out with to keep things interesting. So we decided to play a game of seeing how long we could hold our breath underwater. We stood in the shallow end near the clock on the wall so we could time ourselves. Instead of fully submerging, we just stuck our heads face down in the water. We did this a couple of times and I was winning. On our last round, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I figured it was my cousin giving up and telling me that I won, but instead it was the lifeguard who told me to knock it off or she was going to have to ask us to leave the pool. Since we were tired of being in the pool, we figured we would get out, get dressed, and go back to the basketball court until my grandmother picked us up. We only had an hour left anyways, and the water was freezing. As we got out, the lifeguard stopped us and asked if we wanted to go into the sauna to warm up and dry off. The sign said 18 years or older, so of course we were super excited that she allowed us to do that. She walked us to the sauna and unlocked the door. The door was glass and the interior was made entirely out of wood. Inside, above the door, there was a clock, probably to help make sure you were not in there for an unsafe amount of time. The lifeguard stand was adjacent to the sauna, but if you looked out the door, you could clearly see it. She followed us in and went over to the thermometer encased in plastic and unlocked it so she could crank up the heat. I figured that she must have to turn it on each time, so I didn't think anything of it. Both my cousin and I were very short girls, so we couldn't see the temperature that was printed on the thermometer knob, but I know she was turning up the heat. Then she left and shut the door behind her. I thought I saw her lock the door too, but I thought to myself, why would she lock the door when we might want to get out? I checked the clock and decided we should get out in 10 or 15 minutes. It was already plenty warm in the sauna, but now the room was blazing. It felt nice because I was so cold from the pool. After about 15 minutes, it was starting to get a little bit too hot, and my cousin agreed that we should leave so we can get dressed. I went to turn the knob on the door, but it wasn't budging. I thought maybe it was jammed, so I shook it, but it still wasn't opening, and then I let my cousin try. She couldn't get it open either. We figured the lifeguard would be back in a couple of minutes, so we sat back down and waited. The room was getting hotter now, too, and I really wanted to leave. I got up and started banging on the door and shaking and twisting the knob, trying to get the lifeguard's attention. My cousin got up and joined me. We started screaming at the top of our lungs for her to let us out, but she just stared straight ahead. I don't think there's any way that she couldn't have noticed or heard two little girls banging and kicking the door and screaming. Now we had been in there for about 25 minutes. It was so hot in the sauna that it hurt to breathe. It felt like my lungs were on fire. My eyes and skin were burning. We sat back down and put our towels over our heads because they were a little damp and it made it easier to breathe. I was so worried about my cousin as she is a couple of years younger than me. I looked at the clock and saw that we had been in there for 35 minutes. I got up and walked to the door again and saw the lifeguard still just staring straight ahead. Again, I tried to get her attention by screaming that we needed out and banging on the door as hard as I could, but still nothing. I was starting to get pretty dizzy, so I went to go sit back down, but the wooden seats of the sauna burned my skin. My towel was completely dry, so I put it underneath me to sit on. My hair was also dry, but I wrapped it across my face to cover my nose, and I squinted my eyes so that they didn't burn as bad, but I could still watch if anyone walked past the door. It helped a little bit. My cousin was laying face down with a towel over her head, not moving or saying anything, so I nudged her to make sure that she was still okay. She was, but I could tell that we really needed to get out of there soon because she seemed a bit disoriented. It had been 45 minutes now and I was extremely nauseous. There was no way that the lifeguard would forget that we were in there, and I thought she would have to come back soon, but there was this little voice in my head telling me that maybe she purposely locked us in there. Finally, a man walked past the door towards the pool, but for some reason, I just couldn't get up. My whole body was on fire and I felt so dizzy. Luckily, this man wasn't going to the pool. He wanted to be let into the sauna and came back with a lifeguard. I saw them walking this way and immediately jumped up to grab my cousin. I knew now that for sure she had locked us in there because she pulled out her keys to unlock the door and let the man in. I didn't want to take any chances of us being trapped in there any longer, so as the man was trying to walk in, I was trying to shove our way out. As we were going out, the lifeguard started trying to shut the door and push us back with it. The man was clearly confused about what was going on and said, I think they want out. The lifeguard let out a sigh and opened the door fully, and we ran away as fast as we could into the changing room. We only had about 10 minutes before our grandmother was supposed to pick us up. We were both so shaken by what had just happened that we didn't say anything to each other as we got dressed or on the car ride home. When we got back to the house, my parents were making us dinner and I told them the story of what had just happened. They thought that I must have been exaggerating and they didn't believe me. I truly think that that woman was going to let us cook alive in there. The only bit of doubt that I have is what would have happened if we actually died. She obviously would have gotten the blame. What was her endgame? I'm 21 now, but I think about this interaction all the time, and when I'm in small spaces or I get too warm, I still have panic attacks. No one believes this story, and I get it. It's pretty absurd. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask for opinions, but do you think that this could have been some crazy misunderstanding? Or do you think that she really just left us in there to die? And why? So, to the lifeguard at that YMCA, please, let's not meet again.
The park near my house is plagued by urban legends. Most of them are local legends, and the nature of those legends would vary depending on who you ask. I moved here a little over a year ago with my then fiance, now wife, Megan. She and I both worked from home, and we moved right in the middle of the COVID lockdown, so we didn't have much reason to go out and explore our new hometown. We were really quick to make friends with our neighbors. The day after my wife and I moved in with our dog, Kaya, and 3 cats, we got a ring on our doorbell and we opened it to the sight of 2 women, both in their 60s. They were our next door neighbor, Sandy, and across the street neighbor, May. One had made us homemade jams and the other a homemade pie. I love pie, so this was the perfect way to welcome us to the neighborhood. The neighbors across the street have a gorgeous patio space, and they said they wanted to have a welcome party for us so we could get to know the neighbors around us. Needless to say, we fell in love with these people. In the platonic sense, of course. I think the neighbors were extra excited about having my wife and I move in because at the time we bought this house, we were newly engaged and planning our wedding and talking about having kids, a fresh young family. All our neighbors are elderly and their own kids have their lives of their own in distant places, so they were looking forward to having some babies nearby to watch grow up and spoil since they couldn't do it with their own grandkids. Honestly, it's sweet. Over the following year after moving in, we would have gatherings and parties with our neighbors and their friends at least once every couple of weeks. They had become like family, and we couldn't be more thankful for their guidance once the lockdowns lifted. May and her husband Fred have lived here the longest. They know all the best places to go for breakfast, lunch, dinner, dancing, music, movies, hiking, picnics, you name it. However, even still, most of the time when my wife and I decide we need some time out of our house, we just go right across the street to spend time on the gorgeous patio with May and Fred. Invite over Sandy and her husband Dale and we just talk. About 4 months after moving in, we got a second dog. A Great Dane puppy that we named Appa, points to my cultured people who get the reference. He was 6 weeks old when we got him, and now he's about 10 months old and 135 pounds of pure mischief. He took up a ton of our time to make sure he was trained. A dog this big without good training can and will break everything you own, including your spirit, so there was a period of time where we weren't spending much time with our neighbors, or anyone, or doing anything, at least until we had the confidence in Appa and Kaya to not cause too much chaos, which now we do. So recently the itch to explore our small city has really become more intense for my wife and I. So we've made it a point to go to one new place in our city every Saturday. Most of them have been places that May and Fred have suggested, and they've been right about all of them. When we told them we were looking for a park to take our dogs to, and that we had seen one with a trail that led through the woods about a 2-minute drive from our house, they told us no. Quite adamantly. My wife and I were both really surprised by the force with which May had tried to shut down that idea. We sat in silence, wondering what we may have said to offend her, but she spoke up to explain before we could overthink it. Look, that park is beautiful. Before they built the highway behind our property, we could walk there through the woods. We loved it. She trailed off, but Fred picked up where she left off. It's fine to go there if you stay next to the baseball fields, but don't go on the trails or into the trees. The park is connected to 75 acres of woods, and when I was working as a CI, criminal investigator, I used to get called out there all the time. Fred and May were not glum people. If they weren't talking with a smile, they were listening with one. But right now, they seemed almost disturbed, and Fred explained why. I'm retired, but we aren't a large city. I still sometimes get asked to come out there and look at a body. More dead people have been found out in those trees than any other park, trail, or nature reserve in the next 4 counties combined. My curiosity was absolutely piqued. Back in California, my hometown saw a rash of suicides in a single park one summer. 3 of them happened in just a couple months. They all hung themselves in the trees of the park. Is it something like that? Fred shook his head. No, these here aren't suicides. One of them was about 20 or 30 years ago, but of all the bodies I've seen laying out there, coroner always determined something else killed those people. Thing is, we never caught what it was. After the 5th body, people began spreading rumors and it became a local legend. But over the past 30 years, we've had exactly 59 bodies found in the trees near the trails. May and Fred took turns telling us about the different stories people came up with. Some said the park was haunted by ghosts of a serial killer. Others say the oh-so-common it was built on an old Indian burial ground thing. The most prevalent story is that there is a monster living in the woods. My wife and I are not superstitious, and we didn't believe in the supernatural. Until we decided to go, anyway. We both needed out of the house this past weekend. It had been a couple of months at this point since May and Fred told us the story about the horrible, evil Park of Doom. We grabbed a blanket and decided to hang out within a view of the baseball fields. It was a beautiful day. It was 68 degrees and sunny, and in the early morning it felt good to lay out in the grass near the fields and get the even mixture of warm sunlight on our skin and a cool breeze to refresh us. However, as is prone to happen in East Texas, the sun quickly began to get too hot and the breeze began to get too humid. My wife and I still weren't ready to go home, so we opted to move into the shade just a little ways into a line of trees that separated the baseball fields from the playground and tennis courts. Still nowhere near the trails toward the very back of the park. We would have to cross through the tennis courts, another parking lot, and around some gazebos with picnic tables to get into the trails. We did, and we continued to enjoy the scenery of the park. There was a small creek about 30 feet from us now that flowed out of the woods and into a small pond near the edge of the baseball fields. Between the mottled rays of sun broken up by the sun, the shade, and the soft sounds of flowing water, my wife and I found ultimate relaxation. But not before my wife said, "You look good today, and this lighting is awesome. Let me get a picture of you real quick." Now, I don't like having my pictures taken. I always feel awkward, but my wife insisted that I look good. And I was honestly feeling pretty good, so I agreed. Do me a favor though, I don't want to be the whole focus of the picture, so get me in there, but do a panorama so we see a lot of the park too. She smiled and took my phone from me and opened up the camera. I went and stood by a tree and let her do her thing. Once the picture was taken, we set the blanket back down and laid back down. We had chosen to leave the dogs at home. Megan was in need of a stress-free time, and even though the dogs would have loved the park, we wanted to just be able to close our eyes and chill and not worry about either of them wandering off or eating something they aren't supposed to. It was a good choice overall because it instantly put Megan and I in a better mood. I rested my head on her stomach and she used it as a way to prop up her book. She read and I began to slowly drift into daydreams. After a minute, I opened my eyes and realized how heavy they became, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to take a quick nap. So I let myself drift off until I heard a distant call of the name, Appa. My eyes shot open, not just because of the name I heard called, but because I recognized the voice that called it. My voice. Just as soon as my eyes had opened, my wife had pulled her book away from my head and just looked at me. "Was that you?" Megan asked. "No, but I heard it too." I lifted my head and looked around, but there was nobody else around. There were a couple of cars, but I couldn't tell from this distance if there was anyone in them, at least until one began to pull out of its parking space and head toward where the park exited onto the highway. Maybe it was them. They might just have a dog named Appa too? They were trying to get him in the car to go? Probably, but they sounded so much like you. I wonder if they're as cute, I chuckled. My wife was flirting, which meant she wanted a kiss. I leaned up to give her one before I rested my head back on her stomach and closed my eyes for only a split second. Kaya! My voice yelled. It still sounded just as far, but this time angry. I sat straight up and my wife closed her book. Okay, what the hell, I said to my wife. This can't be a fucking coincidence. She put her book into her purse and stood up, and I sprung to my feet and began to look around. Again, I couldn't see anyone. The cars that had been in the parking lot by the tennis courts had all left, which meant that there was nobody between us and the trails. I got this nagging feeling that if there was a killer out in these woods, they likely felt a little more emboldened to come further out of the trees now that there was nobody else in the parking lot between us and the woods. As mentioned before, this is East Texas, and we aren't a big city. It's mostly rural, which means it's a safe bet that most people are carrying a gun. I am no exception to that rule. I put my phone back in my pocket and used my thumb to feel for the gun, but I didn't lift my shirt to show it, and I certainly didn't draw it. I just made sure it was there in case I needed it. It's time to go, I told my wife as I knelt down and grabbed her purse and handed it to. Luckily for us, we parked near the baseball field, so we were able to head in the opposite direction that my voice was coming from. I kept looking over my shoulder, and though I never saw anything, I could swear I heard the rhythmic sound of snapping twigs following us out of the trees. It stopped once we reached the grass clearing, and we heard nothing once we began walking across the pavement of the parking lot. We got in the car and drove home, and I was so thankful to hear my dogs excitedly barking when I began to unlock the front door. My wife and I both stepped in and checked them out. Nothing was out of the ordinary. Nothing in the house seemed out of place. Everything was as we had left it, and we were able to relax a little more over the next several minutes. We began to speculate together about what the hell happened, but we didn't really come up with any answers that made any sort of sense. The logical explanation was that it was someone we knew was messing with us, someone who knew our dogs' names, and happened to spot us in the park and thought it would be funny to play a prank on us. But that didn't explain how their voice sounded exactly like mine. I didn't really get an answer until this morning when I started flipping through my phone and looking at the pictures we took this past weekend. I take a lot of pictures of my wife and dogs, but I stopped when I got to the panorama my wife took of me in the park. I thought it was an uncommonly good picture of me, where I looked less awkward than I usually do in photos. I zoomed in on my face and considered posting it to Facebook, but then I began looking at the rest of the photo while I was zoomed in, and my heart began to pound when I got a closer look at something between the trees. I am not a twin. My twin sister Anna got married to her fiancé Josh a few days ago. Anna and I have been inseparable always. She's my best friend. I was over the moon when Anna told me that she was engaged. When she asked me to be her maid of honor, I was almost as happy as she must have been when Josh asked her to marry her. On the day of the wedding, I had a doctor's appointment and went straight to the church from there. When I arrived, I met up with the other bridesmaids. I was surprised to see that they weren't wearing the pink dresses Anna had picked out. Instead, they were all wearing long black dresses. I was still wearing jeans and a blouse, and Lillian, one of Anna's friends, asked rudely, "You're gonna change, right?" I told her of course I was. I brought my dress with me. When I got back in my dress, they all looked at me in shock. Lillian snapped at me, "What the f*** do you think you're doing?" I was so confused. Though I was supposed to be maid of honor, the bridesmaids would not let me talk to Anna at all. Instead of being with my sister on her wedding day, I had to sit in the back of the church. Even our mother agreed that I was not to go to the front wearing the dress. I honestly don't remember much of the ceremony. I was ashamed about apparently wearing the wrong dress, so I just sat in the back and kept my head down. All I remember is everyone crying a lot. When we arrived at my parents' house for the reception, I went to the fridge to get some beer I had bought. Now, I know that beer is not exactly festive, but it was the brand Anna and I had drunk together when I turned 18. My parents caught us back then and were really angry, but I thought everyone would find it funny now. I was sure Anna would. However, when my mom saw me with the beers, she grabbed them from me and angrily told me that I was disrespecting Anna. I said that I was sure that Anna would find it funny. My mom replied that I was out of line. I know that a wedding is a serious thing, but everyone was so solemn. You're supposed to have fun too, right? Everyone at the reception was acting strange around me, like I had done something really wrong. Every time I tried to talk to someone, they just left me standing there. Some people even seemed to look at me pitifully for some reason, but they would still not talk to me. The worst thing was that Anna kept avoiding me too. She looked really glum, which was strange because she had been looking forward to her wedding so much. She seemed to be making the rounds, but I never saw her talking to anyone. I finally decided to confront her. I told her that I was sorry about the dress, but that she hadn't told me about the change and I didn't know what I had done wrong. She didn't answer, but looked at me with a look of disdain that she has never given me before. I then asked her why she wasn't with Josh and whether anything had happened between them that was upsetting her. She told me, "I'm not here for Josh. I'm here for you." I have no idea what that was supposed to mean. There was one thing that happened a few days before the wedding that I should mention. Anna didn't want a bachelorette party, but her, me, and a couple of friends went to get drinks to celebrate a little. That evening, I really messed up. I was to be designated driver. At first, I only drank virgin coladas. The others were getting more and more drunk though, and they seemed to have a lot more fun than I did. I thought that 1 or 2 cocktails wouldn't hurt. The others were too drunk to realize what I ordered. At the end of the night, I was more tipsy than I realized and ended up crashing Anna's car. Fortunately, nothing major happened. Anna only got a few scratches and I bumped my head pretty badly, but other than that, we did not have any injuries. Anna was really mad at first, but I thought she would have gotten over it by the wedding. My parents were really mad at me too after the incident. They cried a lot after the police told them what had happened. I think they were really disappointed in me. Josh came over that night too. Even he cried. I think he was really upset that my sister got hurt, even though her injuries weren't bad. I still feel really guilty about drinking and driving, and maybe the accident is the reason why everyone is acting so weird around me. Maybe Anna is still mad about it, but I feel she could have told me that instead of not telling me about the change of dresses, and then being angry that I didn't know about it. The worst thing happened after I went to bed after the reception. I had just fallen asleep when Anna came to my room. She was still wearing her wedding dress. The white fabric almost seemed to glow in the darkness of the room. There were dark stains on her dress. By the looks of it, she had spilled red wine down the front. I think she must have been drunk because she started talking about how I had ruined everything, how it was all my fault. Now she would make me regret it for the rest of my life. Her face was distorted with rage. It almost looked unhuman. I was in shock. Her voice sounded weirdly raspy. Anna is a stress smoker, so I guess she had gotten drunk on wine and smoked a few cigarettes. I started crying and asking her what she meant. She let out an unearthly shriek and jumped at me. She raised her hand as though to hit me, and I instinctively closed my eyes. But she must have missed me because all I could feel was a gush of cold air on my face. When I opened my eyes again, she had left. I woke up several times during the night and heard her wailing every time. Not just crying, wailing. The next night, she suddenly stood next to my bed. She was just standing there, wailing and showing no reaction when I tried to talk to her. I must somehow have fallen back to sleep with her standing there. I don't remember her leaving, just that she was suddenly gone. Since then, she has come to my room every night. Every time she wears her stained wedding dress. I don't know why she's tormenting me. I've been meaning to talk to her about it during the day, but she's always left the house before I get up. She just comes to my room at night, berating me, crying, and telling me that she will never let me have peace again. I told my parents about her behavior, but they refused to have a talk with her. They even said that I was imagining it. They said that I had to understand that Anna was not here anymore. I told them that I knew she lived in an apartment with Josh now, but that she obviously came to our house every night. I'm really frustrated that they don't believe me. I don't want to go to bed tonight. To be honest, I'm terrified of Anna.